Good night, I should say, from Sydney. It's 9:30, 9:36, almost our bedtime. And it is my pleasure to present on behalf of me, Karen, and there is one more supervisor in addition to Karen, who is Federico. And the topic for my presentation is development, community development, post-development, and localization. Is localization and alternatives to development or a new jargon? And I would like to thank Karen and Federico for their support since they are my supervisor in my PhD. To keep my conference paper presentation simple, I will be discussing on very briefly on the objectives of this study, and then introduction and a bit of literature review. And then briefly, I'll be talking about methodology, and then we'll be doing some discussion and some findings, followed by conclusion. The aim of this paper is to empirically analyze and explore the concept of localization recently being discussed in the development sector, particularly in humanitarian sector, within the overall development, including community development context, using the lens of post-development theory. Let me straightly jump into the literature. Literature review of approximately 7 decades on development, including community development, particularly its meaning types or stages, key actors and approaches has been summarized here. The literature generally seem to agree that there is no clear meaning and understanding of development. Development is an amoeba-like concept, changing its shape, form, or structure. Similarly, there is no unified agreement about meaning of development. Thus, development means different things at different times and in different places. Moreover, 7 decades of development practices is divided into 3 types, or we can say 6 stages. These 3 types of humanitarian or emergency development, charity-based development, and systematic development. In relation to 6 stages, development is started with large infrastructure projects from 1945 to 1960s, and then moved to basic needs in 1970s. It then moved to a structural adjustment program in 1980s, and then to basic human and poverty reduction with microfinance in 1990s. After 1995, development adopted some sort of comprehensive development approach, and now we are experiencing the right-based approach in development. There were and are different actors in development. Them 4 actors in development are bilateral agencies such as USAID or DFAT, multilateral agencies such as the World Bank, IMF, or United Nations, and development NGOs like World Vision and some other local NGOs. Furthermore, development practice different development approaches. To name some of known approaches are self-help approach, asset-based development approach, or we can call it asset-based community development approach, value-based development approach, strength-based development approach, human rights approach, and many more. In reality, we can discuss different development approaches within the philosophical level and in practical level. In philosophical or overarching level, these many development approaches come under either blank slate approach or free development approach. Blank slate approach is extremely top-down, expert-led, and has a strong connection to colonialism and imperialism. Therefore, solutions to any problems would also be technocratic. This approach appears to be the dominant development approach at conceptual level for the last 7 decades. On the other hand, free approach is bottom-up, participatory approach, which includes spontaneous solutions to problem in community level. Literature generally shows that blank slate approach dominated the entire development in its entire history. Since development was dominated by blank slate approach, free approach criticized the narratives of blank slate development approach produced by authoritarian mindsets and advocated for an alternative development approach. Most of the development approach, participatory approach, were captured by mainstream development approach to be seen as free development approach. Now, given the background of a bit on development history and literature, let me go into the post-development. What post-development theory is a critical theory influenced by many other critical development theories, theories including post-structuralism, post-colonial theory, and dependency theory. It takes a critical look at the theory and practice of development and tries to contest popularly held beliefs regarding development practices. It does not only question development practices on the account of its results, but also of its intention, worldview, and mindset. There are four arguments of PDT. PDT argues that there is no universal understanding of the term development. Thus, PDT helps question practices, beliefs, and understanding of overall development practices. Second, PDT argues that development is all about notion of power and its dynamics, particularly the power of language and discourses. PDT helps to unpack languages, way of thinking, and discourses used in development. And the third, PDT argues that development is all about hegemony and it's Eurocentric, and is used to legitimize interventions in developing countries. Particularly, PDT helps explore how Western thinking, culture, management, philosophy, worldviews, and narratives have influenced overall development in developing countries. Lastly, and the most importantly, PDT argues that current development concepts and practices are absolutely not working. Development overall is a failed project, and hence alternatives to development is needed. PDT helps investigate different development alternatives being practiced and see what alternatives are being practiced without support from donors. Now let's go to what the localization is. The most recent evolving concept or point of view while reviewing development practices is localization. The discussion of localization has started from humanitarian sector. Some authors argue that the concept of localization of aid has been present in the humanitarian sector for decades in the form of building on local capacities. But key commitments to localization made notably in the 2016, also known as Grand Bargain. Bargain or unique agreement between some of the largest donors and humanitarian organizations who have committed to get more funds and control into the hands of people in need and to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of humanitarian action. In total, 7 components of localization have been identified, and they are relationship quality, participation, revolution, funding and financing, capacity, coordination, visibility, and policy. Similar discussions such as the idea of localization is starting in the development sector. One example is the discussion on locally led development. However, it is yet to fully see in the practice. While gray literature on localization and development has emerged in the sector, there has not been adequate academic research or the research on the idea of localization within the notion in development, including community development, and then how this plays the role in the nature of relationship between the so-called donors and NGOs. This discussion of localization definitely is able to shape development practices in the future. So what sort of methodology? This project is a PhD project at University of Technology, Sydney. Our conference paper has been developed after completion of stage 1 of PhD. This paper has been developed reviewing the literature of development, post-development, localization, and their robust analysis. So let me head to the discussions. The meaning of development approaches, processes, narratives, and understandings have changed. And development appears to be all about donor-led, top-down, and led externally. And that's something we can see. And while colonized and imperial development thinking have played a significant role to shape development, work of people and grassroots agencies, as discussed by some author on free development and participatory development, are examples of different development thinking. To name some of the bottom-up approaches, development and community development being discussed in the development and community development literature are community-led development, self-help group approach, participatory approach, asset-based development approach. There are so many more. However, imperial development thinking and associated approaches such as blank slate approach appears to play a dominant role. Therefore, development, when practiced for approximately 4 decades, it was heavily criticized for its intention. One of such theories, PDT. So one of the alternatives being discussed by PDT scholar is locally led or bottom-up development, or civil society having a strong leading role in the development, or putting faith of the local communities and community organization. Likewise, alternative to development is also about developing world autonomy and responsibility for their own economic and social development in accordance with their own priorities and plans. Many bottom-up approaches in the development have been discussed and practiced. Most of the bottom-up approaches introduce earlier examples. So I'm towards the end. Localization is the recent one of the promising bottom-up approaches to development. Idea within the localization is local organization and communities and people will have more control over the development they want to do for themselves, including funds, resources for development. The COVID-19 pandemic also has enhanced the discussion and the urgency of localization within the development sector. Hence, localization appears to be one of the promising alternatives to development, or true alternative as argued by PDT. However, history has shown that all the bottom-up approaches in developing countries were captured by Western-led development. Development agencies did not only capture the bottom-up approaches to development, but also use them to intervene in internal affairs of developing countries. For localization to really work as an alternative to development, it should be free from all types of influences and should not be captured by the development agencies. Otherwise, localization will be a tool for the continuation of colonialism and neoliberalism in the southern communities, and just another donor jargon in development and community development. 7 decades of history tends to suggest localization also will be ended up as another jargon or catchy phrase within the local and international community development. Thank you.